What is my magic? I think it still does come back to that creativity and passion that I have for virtual reality and just life in general. I'm just so excited by this technology. I experienced it for the first time in 2016, and I still light up when I put on a headset. I at least go into VR once a week because we have our team meetings in VR once a week, but usually I'm in VR, I would say 3, 4 times throughout the week, whether it's playing poker with some friends that live in different places around the world, or we're going to fight a dragon on a castle in VR, all of these different things. Like, it's just so cool that I can pick up a headset that's laying beside me and be transported to a whole different world, that I still feel this passion to want to share that with anybody that will take the time to experience it.
Welcome to Magic Academy podcast. Today with us is Evan, the founder of XpertVR, and a VR company that focuses on building innovative, immersive, and highly learnable environment for interesting initiatives and, for example, firefighting, for example, building empathy, and you name it. And he just completed a world tour and bringing his solutions to a lot of places where learning and development are much needed in the virtual space. So welcome, Evan, to the podcast.
Yeah, Jiani, thank you for having me. It's great to be back. Or
Yeah,
beyond.
it's great to be. I've been waiting to hear about your stories after that world trip on the school bus that you converted.
Yeah, I'll be honest to start off, I haven't done the full world tour. We've done a bunch of smaller tours over the past year, so we're still planning some larger tours.
That's great. As long as it's on the mission and as long as you're doing it, the process is the gold.
Yes.
Excellent. If you were to introduce yourself in a unique way, how would you introduce yourself in 30 seconds if you're open to that?
Yeah, I think in a unique way, I'm a 27-year-old bus driver, entrepreneur, firefighter trainer, and manager of an amazing team. Yeah, I think that's how I would very quickly break it down if I were to put it
I
in a
love
few
it.
words.
There's a lot of layers right there. The bus driving sounds very fun as well.
Yes.
I love it. So why expert VR? What was the tipping point? What was the kind of the moment you like, yeah, let's do this?
It first started before Expert VR, just being interested in virtual reality in general. So it was back in 2016. I was watching all kinds of YouTube videos and really loved the videos where you could hold up your phone and look around and see everything, 360 videos. And a few YouTubers I was following were starting to shoot with those videos, but the cameras were brand new. Lots of people had to set up 6 GoPros all together to film these videos. And so I got interested in that. I'd always been interested in video production. And that's what got me into VR, got me excited about the technology of how could you travel to other places in the world and experience other things from your home with a phone and just by having that video captured. And so I started filming those videos and quickly found out about virtual reality headsets. I don't think I even knew about virtual reality really before filming those videos. And that led to me and my now business partner, Drew, buying a headset together. He was the ambassador for the incubator that I was a part of. And we just bought a headset together to have fun and to see the videos in VR and experience all these other VR games that were out there. So that was the initial excitement, the passion behind virtual reality and what became Expert VR. But I think really Expert VR came out of us being entrepreneurs and needing money. And we spent $5,000 as broke university students to buy the computer and the headset. And it was like all the savings and credit card debt that we could take on. And we thought, how can we make money back on this? So we were just setting it up out front of our incubator and at different places around the school, first for free for people to try out. Then we started charging some people for it. And then eventually we had one of our first mentors. She wasn't a mentor at the time, but Rashmi, her and her partner, Rick, they have a consulting company out of Niagara, and they were just doing some classes at our local university, and they walked by and they saw us playing games and they asked, could we use this for our classes? Could we use it for training and education? And having that conversation really sparked an idea for us of we can do a lot more than just renting this out for games. And that's when we started XpertVR of how can we use this technology for more than games and for good. And yeah, it started with that soft skills consulting based training, then pivoted to research, and now back into hard skills training.
Yeah, so it's really built upon the demand and people's needs and curiosities. And were there any particular kind of case studies that you were willing to or open to share?
Yeah,
What
for
kind of hard
sure.
skills? Yeah.
Yeah, I think to share one on soft skills and one on hard skills, and I can share more if you
Mm.
want as well. Starting on the soft skills side of things, we built a simulation for an ethics professor at Brock University, and he's done all kinds of different games. I actually took his class when I went to university there, and he does all kinds of games and interactive things for students to really understand ethical behavior in a business landscape. And one of the main case studies that any ethics class will study is about the Ford Pinto. And this was a car back in the 70s, that real thing that happened. This car, if you hit it at the wrong angle in a car crash, the whole car would explode because the gas tank was too close to a certain point in the car. And Ford at the time decided, we're not going to recall the car. We're just going to pay the millions of dollars in lawsuits because it's going to be cheaper than recalling all of the cars. And now it's become this famous business case study that every student goes through of how unethical that was. So we built the virtual reality version where instead of just reading a piece of paper and trying to understand what the executives went through at Ford and all the other people within the business went through at Ford at that time, now you're in virtual reality and it's set in present day where there's an electric vehicle that if in a car crash, the electric batteries will explode and injure or likely kill the passengers and people around it. And so you have to go through learning about that car, learning about the problem, talking to your different coworkers, learning about the company culture that you're in, and at the end, make a decision. Are you going to recall the car or put it out there and pay out the lawsuits? And the research was supported by the Chartered Professional Accountants Association, CPA, and basically the research found that by going through virtual reality and doing this learning in real life, in a real life setting, it actually led to people being much more empathetic to what was happening in there instead of just reading it or watching videos. And so that was just a really interesting insight of how much more connected people get to the content. And studies have come out or since then from PwC showing that people are actually 3.75 times more emotionally connected to virtual reality content compared to any other traditional learning. So that was just an amazing case study to be able to offer. Now there's schools all across Ontario that are using that ethics simulation so that students get a better grasp of business ethics. Switching over to the hard skill side of things, like you mentioned, firefighting, that's become our bread and butter, where we've now released a firefighting product, Expert Fire. So fire departments are using it, colleges are using it to train their students. And there was a study or case study or example that we had with it in its early days. We were working with Conestoga College to develop the first version of this simulation. And we had a student go into a house and she was doing her search and rescue procedure, going around the house to rescue somebody, and she went into the basement of the house and found 4 victims in the basement. So as a firefighter, when you find more than one victim, basically you can only rescue one person at a time, and that's you and a partner. You have to make sure that you as a firefighter are safe before the people there, because if you're hurt, you can't help save those people. So she was panicked and forgot, what is the procedure here? How do I rescue these 4 people? Who's the right person to rescue first, etc. And in that panic, in that confusion, she forgot that she was in the basement and thought she was in the garage. So then when she went to get out with the first victim, she was looking for the door to get out of the garage instead of looking for the stairs to get out of the basement. This led to her running out of air. She blacked out, like virtually blacked out. And now the other firefighters, her classmates, were able to come in and rescue her and perform a Mayday scenario where there's a Mayday firefighter. So it was a great learning experience for her classmates. And then her taking off the headset, obviously she was safe, not hurt at all, and a great learning opportunity with her professor there and her instructor to go through what did you do right, what did you do wrong, where did you mess up. And it's just amazing to see that impact because that's something that could happen in live training. And there are lots of firefighters that have died during training because they make these mistakes. And that's just horrible to hear that you could put somebody through virtual reality and make sure that they run into these mistakes before they run into them either in the real world or even in real world training. Yeah, those are two case studies.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I think on the first case study, I would be curious, and maybe our audience are curious as well, is what is the underlying reason that when people are learning something in the virtual reality, they tend to be more empathetic versus somebody just watching a movie or a video? Is there any particular reasons behind that?
Yeah, there's a few reasons. The main one is when you're in virtual reality, you're fully focused on the content you're learning, and everything that you see, touch, feel, hear is all the virtual learning environment that you're in. Whereas when you're watching a video, I could stare at my screen in front of me, and then I might look at my phone to the side, or I may get distracted looking out a window. All of those things might happen that may distract you, so you're not fully focused on the learning environment. But then as well, because it's a fully 3D environment, you're interacting with avatars. And although they may look a little cartoony, we try to make them look very realistic, but they may still look a little cartoony. It does trick your brain after a little bit of, okay, I'm in this virtual environment, I'm learning here, and these are supposed to be real people that I'm interacting with them. So then in your brain, how you act is like you would act in the real world. And yeah, that trick of your brain of interacting with that and being fully focused and being able to turn around and look around and see everything virtually just gets you that much more connected with the content because you are interacting with a fully 3D learning environment that is built for you to learn in.
I like that. So it's controlling your environment and also enable your brain to think that I'm in a environment and I'm interacting with those avatars, and for a period of time they may feel that it's real. I did come across with research that there is ways for us to design a virtual environment to make it be as to maintain the fidelity level as high as possible, to I wouldn't say to persuade our brain to think that
Yes.
we're in this real situation, and that kind of get us respond in a way that we would respond in the real world. There's also a concept called the embodied emotions. It's like we're learning through the movement
Yes,
as well.
for sure. And
That's
yeah, I would say for anybody listening out there, there's pros and cons, or there's different levers for you to pull on in the virtual reality world. And like kind of one of the main ones to the point that you're talking about of how realistic it is the type of hardware you're working with. And if you're running this as like a class and there's only a couple students coming in, or if you're running it as a research study, you can likely have the highest end hardware out there and you can make everything look really realistic. Now, if you're trying to get something out to the mass public, or you have hundreds of students that you're trying to get this to, then you're not going to want to have the highest end hardware that is hooked up to a computer and is stationary and can only be used in one room of the university. You're going to want to have standalone headsets that don't have any wires and can move around to different classrooms or different areas within the university, or even be sent home with students. And then you're going to have a little bit lower fidelity of what the quality of the virtual experience is. So there's those levers that you do have to play with. We feel like we've gotten to a good place where things look realistic but they still work on those standalone devices. But it is something to consider when you're looking at realism versus usability.
I love that. And in the second case study, you're talking about people going through this virtual reality training for firefighting. It feels like it's getting so real that people are really emotionally invested. Will there be possibilities that people can potentially get too emotionally invested, and what would be the balance?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the person. I know I have some bad memories from some VR horror games. Definitely can see how that can happen. I would say in the end, it's really just about reminding people when they go into virtual reality, just remind them that they are going into VR, this is a headset that they can take off at any time if they feel uncomfortable. Hopefully there's somebody outside that's able to help them as well if there's like settings they need to change to make it more comfortable and like with software wise. So just giving them that preemptive nudge that, hey, if you feel uncomfortable or you feel too emotionally connected here, because there are lots of like historic simulations where it's talking about abuse to certain races or different wars or abuses to different genders, things along those lines that could really trigger people if they had experienced that in the past, let's say. So giving those reminders, giving those prompts before somebody goes into VR, I think is really the main way to do it, because it's going to be different for everybody. The only other way I would say that it can be done to control that environment and make sure somebody is comfortable is by adding data into the simulation, being able to track things like heart rate or other physiological responses to the environment and to the scenario that they're in. That might be able to tell you outside of the simulation without any verbal cues if somebody is feeling uncomfortable or stressed or anything along those lines, where then maybe you have controls to turn down the how intense the simulation is, or maybe you just know that, oh, they're at a certain stress level or uncomfortable level that I should just pull them out of the headset. That does get a lot more complex though.
Additionally to the VR, you probably need to have some sort of data collector point to install within the AR VR set.
Yeah, there has been some good advancements. I've been talking to a researcher at University of Waterloo, and he uses different watches, different like fitness trackers, some custom ones that can track most of it without being on your head, and they're pretty non-invasive to put on. So there definitely are ways to do it where it's not like too complex, but it does require some like custom coding and additional things to be added into the simulation.
I really like that. And were there particular, you shared 2 case studies. What are some frameworks that when we think about VR and learning development and skill training that we need to, what kind of framework can we use to guide our decisions? If we're learning this skill, I think it's ideal opportunity for us to explore virtual reality. Were there any sort of like framework that you would recommend folks to
Yeah, there's
consider?
one for sure. There's one framework I would recommend, and then one just recommendation. So starting with the framework is the DICE framework. Jeremy Bailenson, he's a famed VR researcher. He put out this framework, and basically DICE, DICE, stands for dangerous, impossible, counterintuitive, or expensive. So basically, when you're thinking about should I do this in virtual reality, it should fall into one or more of those buckets. If it doesn't, then you should likely be doing that training and education in the real world or with a different training method. So obviously number one is a dangerous. If you're going in to fight a fire or fly a plane and you don't have any experience doing that, it's a really good idea to get some training in a simulation beforehand. Is it impossible? If you're doing history or geography tours where you're taking people back in time, or you want to take them to a different planet or just to a different location on the earth for them to explore, that's likely going to be impossible. Like time travel's obviously impossible, but traveling around the world for a class, yeah, science fiction. But even just like traveling around the world for a class, I guess that falls into the expensive bucket, but also impossible, not practical, exactly. Counterintuitive. Basically,
yeah, I'm curious about that. What is counterintuitive?
Yeah, so that one I have a hard time explaining as well. I think one of the ideas there is, hey, we could train, like for paramedics, let's say, we could train on the ambulance that is available to us. There's an ambulance that we can book out for the day and train on how to use all the different tools within the ambulance, how to drive it, how to open all the doors, what goes inside every cubby and every drawer that's within an ambulance. But you're also then taking that off the road for a day where it could be used to rescue people and help save lives for that day. So it's counterproductive, it's counterintuitive to take that off of the road when you could have a virtual version to train on so that you don't have to take it off the road. And then lastly, touches on some of the other examples that I've already given there, but the expensive/rare, yeah, the other option in that paramedic example would be to buy an ambulance that is owned by a college and is available there 24/7 for students to use. But that's a very expensive expense to buy a whole ambulance and have it fully kitted out just to have it sitting there and be used a few days or a few weeks out of the year for students to train on. Or similarly, if you're needed to ship some sort of an ambulance or a large piece of machinery around to different locations to train people on how to use it, just the shipping cost is going to be very expensive for a large piece of machinery or a vehicle like an ambulance. So very expensive. DICE falling into one of those four buckets is how you want to look at VR.
Yeah, and also another example that I can think about is like healthcare training. It's very expensive to set the scenery and get the patient actor, get the supporting actors, and setting things as you want it to. So it makes much more sense of just doing that. And then it does not eliminate the need to do a real scenario based training. I think it's help you to get prepared, at least get multiple exposures before we get to the real situation, that make the learning more effective too, the utilization of the resources.
For sure. And that's a great point. I don't think virtual reality should be replacing any live training that's out there. Like our firefighters, they're going through our training at least 3 times before they go do a live burn training. We're not trying to replace that live burn training, but it ensures that they're fully prepared and they're actually able to focus on more advanced skills when they go into that live burn training. Or similarly with your healthcare example, students should still be going and doing a practical and learning alongside other nurses or other doctors or what have you in the healthcare space. And that's possible from the get-go. It's not impossible. It's not necessarily counterintuitive. It's probably not that expensive to have a student there helping you as a nurse. It's probably not that dangerous for them as a nursing student to be there, but it probably is pretty dangerous you as a patient to be getting a surgery done or getting help from a group of nurses and one of them has never even seen a patient before. So if they can do that training in virtual reality and then still do that practical afterwards, they're going to be much more prepared, just like you said.
Yeah, definitely. And I think so moving forward into the future a little bit, how would you envision future of virtual reality training with all the advanced technologies that are Gen AI, Web 3, Web 3.0, and the brain machine interactions where you can put the chip and you just learn something new or develop new capabilities?
Yeah, I think I can put most of those together. I would say the brain computer interface might have some controls for VR in the future. I would say for the most part, at least in my opinion, that is like the next iteration after VR. That I don't know if I can download like the Matrix, I can learn a new language or learn any skill by just downloading it. I probably don't need virtual reality for education anymore.
I would vote for that.
Yeah, I
If
would
it's
love that.
safe.
Yes, if it's safe for sure. So exciting technology. I think it's cool what all those companies are doing, but yeah, not too much relation to virtual reality necessarily. Looking at everything else though, I think number one is building quote unquote the metaverse or just large virtual spaces where people can interact just like they do on the internet today. And in the education space and what we're trying to build towards eventually collaboratively with other companies as well is an educational quote unquote metaverse, or let's just call it an educational hub where I can picture there being a generic city that has their downtown core with skyscrapers and all of that. Then there's a suburban area, there's a wildlife area, there's an industrial area, all of the areas that you would see in any city or town, as well as like farming land, so any like rural areas as well. Having all of those in one central learning hub where you can have firefighters, police officers, paramedics, all responding to a large disaster or emergency together. And then after that emergency happens, you could have carpentry students and construction students learning on how to repair a building because of that emergency. You would then have legal students that are taking that case of what happened in that emergency and taking it to court. So having all of those industries interacting together in that large learning hub where you can train by yourself or you can train with others. That's where I kind of picture things going. We want to do it for the first responder space and then build upon that. And it's a ways away, but that's what we're trying to build towards and where I see the future of education heading, involving some of the other technologies that you commented on or brought up. AI is going to be a huge part of that for all of the avatars that you're interacting with, as well as I think there will be AI that's like tracking all of the learning outcomes. And sorry, I mentioned earlier, DICE was like the framework that I look at. Learning outcomes is the other tip. If you're building a virtual reality simulation for education, make sure it fits into the DICE framework, but then what are the learning outcomes that are going to come out of this? And always have that as your primary focus of why you're building the simulation and why each feature is being added. It should be tied back to those learning outcomes. So in this future of education, there should be AIs that know what are the learning outcomes this student is trying to learn and is testing you or just tracking data in the background to understand, are you reaching those learning outcomes and which ones at which pace? You might have learned learning outcome 1 and 2 all the way to 100% or 98%, but you've been falling behind and only learned 50% of learning outcome 3. So then the AI should be able to adjust that simulation or the scenario that you're in to more focus on learning outcome 3 so that you get more experience with that and can fully learn that learning outcome. And then the last technology that you mentioned, Web3, I think blockchain is how like a lot of this data is going to be tracked and made sure that it's securely stored, as well as I see a future where we don't need to have resumes or diplomas that are a piece of paper and degrees that are a piece of paper. Instead, there are NFTs that maybe they look cool, they have a 3D model that's attached to them, or they have a Bored Ape that's attached to them, whatever. It doesn't matter what the art looks like, but that then verifies what you did. So I've gone through and I've got my business degree, and now I have this NFT that represents the business degree, where I got it, when I got it, what I learned throughout that whole process, so that when I go to get a job, I just say, yep, here's my MetaMask wallet, and you can see all of the NFTs that I've collected for the different courses that I took and for the full degree that I got. And you can verify that these haven't been edited, haven't been changed, they're registered on the blockchain, and now I know what degree this person has.
Oh, I love that. It's like education is no longer sitting in the classroom and learning the content. It's fully embodied learning. And it's not only fully embodied learning, it's learning within the ecosystem. So it's like connecting learners to this bigger picture, the societies. And that can potentially also foster a sense of responsibility and a sense of ethics, because everybody is connected. It's not just me sitting in the classroom with few folks and a teacher. I like how you kind of vision the Web3 as a way to showcase people's authenticity and training. And you can also see, oh, this person went through this training and versus this person just went through a test. And I think it feels like people who went through a real simulation can be more persuasive, because there's a lot of things that the real simulation can test informally versus a test.
For sure. Plus, I would even say I would agree that the virtual reality version is the best version there, but the NFTs and Web3 type technology would really prove that, where now you can see, okay, this 50% of the population, they went through the virtual reality training, and here's the NFTs that they've achieved in their career now because of that, versus here's the people that went through other types of learning or didn't do all of the same learning, and here's the NFTs that they've achieved or the achievements that they've gotten in their career. And it obviously takes a long time, but after 10, 20 years, you're able to see, okay, this is how the two populations are comparing. This is the type of education people should be taking or doing versus the other one.
I love that. That's beautiful. And were there potential challenges or risks that we need to pay attention to?
There's always risks out there. I think virtual reality, especially today, one of the biggest ones is accessibility. And that comes down to accessibility just in general of the controls and different people with different Disabilities might not be able to, if you're blind, most simulations, obviously, you can't see them. VR is very visual. There are some simulations, and we've made a lot of improvements so that if you're partially blind, you can still use them. So there are like ways, but most simulations aren't accessible for that. Controllers might not be as accessible depending on different disabilities you may have, or just in general, there is a slight population, I think it's 4 to 6% of the population gets motion sickness in virtual reality. So you might not even want to put on a VR headset. And we're making strides, us as XpertVR, but also many other companies, especially big companies like Meta, are making strides to minimize that, but it still is a problem. And we want to make sure that if we're making education that is the best education out there, or making it mandatory for people to take, we want to make sure that everyone can actually take it and use that tool. So I would say that's like concern number one. Past that, I think privacy is a big concern. There's been some studies that have come out that just by tracking how your head moves in VR and how your controllers move in virtual reality, they can actually predict to a certain confidence level. I don't know what it is, but to a certain confidence level, they can predict future diseases that you may have, like Parkinson's and things along those lines. So on one hand, that's great. Okay, let's find out, like in your 20s, we could find out if you're going to have a disease in your 60s. But at the same time, somebody sells that data to an insurance company and they're like, well, you're going to have a disease in 40 years. We're not going to insure you. Obviously, that becomes a big problem. So the privacy of how that data is used and shared, and I think just in general, giving a lot of control to the consumer for how that data is collected, number one, and then how that data can be shared afterwards is very important. Those are the two main concerns that I would have.
That's great. I think it's super valid, and I feel like no matter how fast the technology develop, it's always coming back to that humanity perspective. What is right? What is wrong? How do we protect the vulnerable? How do we, at the same time, progress and evolve us as a
For sure.
species with all the technologies that's there?
And that reminds me too, I talk about accessibility on how to use the technology and being able to access it, but I think a big problem here as well is in so many developing countries around the world, they're just getting access to smartphones, and smartphones are becoming something that most people around the world have daily access to. But VR obviously isn't anywhere near there. And if this becomes a technology where people are learning 10 times faster, not saying that's a stat, I think it's 4 times faster is the stat. So if people are learning 4 times faster in virtual reality compared to their peers that don't have access to VR, then that's just a big disparity there, where we need to make sure that everyone has access to this technology. And if everyone does, then it can unlock an amazing wealth of knowledge around the world. But without that access, it's not possible.
Yeah, and also I recently saw a product that actually helps people who are visually impaired through the verbal cues and descriptions to help them to see better. So that could also be where the AI can play a huge role in terms of creating accessibilities in the virtual reality world.
For sure.
Nice. Great. As we move into the magic part of the conversation, I would give a brief recap for our audience. So far, we've talked about the story of Evan and when he decided to found XpertVR. And we talked about a few interesting case studies. One is focused on soft skill. The other one is focused on the hard skill. One is firefighting. And then the other one is the ethics, the business ethics of decision making. We also talked about the framework. It's called DICE. You should dial back to see what DICE is. And then we also talked about the embodied emotions and how learning in the virtual reality can actually potentially expedite the learning time and also potentially make your learning more efficient. We also talked about the future, how virtual reality learning can marry all the other technologies like Web 3.0, artificial intelligence, and brain-machine interactions, and how Evan is envisioning a super interconnected virtual world where learning does not happen just in a classroom, but also happening in the bigger ecosystems that's very much like the real world out there. And we also talked about some potential risks like data privacy and all the ethics and accessibility, and how can we protect the folks who need to have the protection while also advance learning for the everyone in the planet. And as we move into the magic piece, so Evan would be curious to hear, what did you enjoy doing when you were 11 or 16 years old and that time just disappeared for you?
Yeah, I think a few things. Just in general, I was never really into like video games. I didn't really have too much TV around my house when I was a kid. So when I was indoors, I loved playing with Lego and being creative with Lego. I didn't really have too many like Lego sets where I was building something specific. I just had a lot of Lego to build my own creations. So I think really helped to build my creativity as a kid. And similarly, my friends and I, we spent most of our time playing outdoors, whether that was just like playing grounders and different games on a jungle gym or tag and things like that around the forest in my backyard and things along those lines. So I think what really resonates with where I am today is the entrepreneurial side of things. I think I was 11 or 12 when I started a dog walking company. Before that, I had all sorts of like lemonade stands throughout the summer and selling cookies at the end of my driveway alongside lemonade. I had a curb painting business where we would paint house numbers on curbs so that if paramedics or other first responders were driving down a street and they couldn't see the house number on the house, they could just look at the curb and see the house number there. So also connects to the first responder space that I'm in right now. But yeah, starting all sorts of business from the age of, I don't know, probably 6 or 7. First major business was the dog walking and pet care business when I was 11. I call it major, but not really. And then many other businesses after that. Yeah, I was just always entrepreneurial and loved starting businesses. Not like obviously liked the money, but really just as something to do and learning a new skill and just getting out there. I know my friends and I, probably like every kid, would always say, I'm bored, what can we do? And we would never come up with something to do. So doing a business where we could make a little bit of money doing something was always exciting.
Yeah, and in service of fellow humans and providing values and learning by doing, learning by servicing.
For sure. And
Amazing.
I would say even value for ourselves, not for most of those businesses, but at least for the dog walking one. Like I had a couple cats growing up. I love cats, but I always wanted a dog as well. But I was never allowed to have one, too expensive, too much responsibility, etc. So being able to start a dog walking business where I could spend time with dogs as a kid was like a way to do that and also make some money doing it.
I love it. What role do you think childlike wonder play like in your life as a founder?
Yeah, I think for me, it's childlike wonder or just creativity in general still plays a huge role. I am a business founder. I don't really have the technical skills that our team has. So being able to come in with this like creative mindset, looking at problems, I don't want to say I do it too regularly, but I'll come into a problem where our developers are looking at something with their developer lens, and I can come in not with a business lens, but with just a creative, open mind kind of lens and look at the problem that they're facing and
Mhm.
say, have you thought about doing this? Or I saw this article about X, Y, or Z. Have you looked at that article? And like I said, it doesn't happen all the time or super often, but I find that when I can come in and have that lens, it at least changes up the conversation, if not presents a solution that's going to work that they would have never thought of or would have taken a long time to think of just looking at it with their developer lens on.
I love that. So it's seeing the problems with fresh pair of eyes and finding the hidden perspectives or the past less traveled, and maybe that holds the key to problem solving. Love that.
Exactly. Yeah. So seeing that both on the development side as well as just in business day to day, like we're always facing challenges, and like we talked about or briefly mentioned, and me saying that I'm a bus driver, like last year we were trying to think what's a new way to market expert VR. And we get a million emails a day. We talk to a million people a day that are like, oh, do some ads on LinkedIn or try our cold email outreach and all of these different things, which we do try all of those traditional methods. But then I was like, what if we like built a bus that we could travel around to different locations in to demo VR, but also act as a place for us to live and sleep in when we're traveling to all these locations, and also a big billboard for XpertVR because we're going to paint the outside with our branding and everything. And then we ended up doing that. And we haven't been able to do the big tours that we were planning, but we've been able to take it to a bunch of smaller tours and 1 week tours and road trips. And it's been very successful there in helping our online marketing and being able to excite people of saying, hey, the bus is coming by your location. We'd love to stop in and chat with you. So yeah, childlike wonder on that side as well.
I love that. It just makes business life much more enjoyable and fun.
Yes.
That's great. Were there any particular challenges that you have to overcome that helped to shape who you are as a leader?
Yeah, there's always challenges. Every day comes with new challenges or new opportunities. I would say like one of the biggest ones that kind of goes against my last point of childlike wonder and creativity, or at least just is different from that, and a big learning thing, especially over the past year, but I think I've been learning it for multiple years, and it's finally just actually hitting home or setting in, is like having contracts and having like things written down of exactly what you're promising to do, what you're thinking you want to do. We've had multiple clients where we go in with more of that creative type of mindset and we're like, yeah, let's just promise them the world and then we're going to build those things. And then we notice, hey, like we're way out of scope of the project, or we're running out of time to get this done when it needs to be delivered next week. And one, either we've overpromised and we need to get the work done, or we've just mentioned some things and we didn't really have a concrete contract writing down what we were going to do, and now the clients are expecting those things, and we're like, well, that was just an idea that we threw out there but we never really solidified it, but because we didn't have it written down, they're really expecting it now. So we've seen that on the business client side of things. We've seen it on the employee side of things as well. Yeah, I think just in general, even though it's boring, having contracts, having things written down so that everybody's on the same page and agreeing on everything can be very helpful as a business leader or owner.
Yeah, much more needed, and that requires a lot of planning and thinking through, and also experience. And probably won't get it right for the first time, but
Definitely not.
next addendum or something. So overall, what do you think is your magic?
What is my magic? I think it still does come back to that creativity and passion that I have for virtual reality and just life in general. I'm just so excited by this technology. I experienced it for the first time in 2016, and I still light up when I put on a headset. I at least go into VR once a week because we have our team meetings in VR once a week, but usually I'm in VR, I would say 3-4 times throughout the week, whether it's playing poker with some friends that live in different places around the world, or we're going to fight a dragon on a castle in VR, all of these different things. Like, it's just so cool that I can pick up a headset that's laying beside me and be transported to a whole different world, that I still feel this passion to want to share that with anybody that will take the time to experience it. And then especially when it comes to education and training, I just see how I was in school and how I was so bored by a lot of the topics that I was taught. And I see that across the board with every student that I talk to, no matter if they're studying something that might be considered boring like accounting, or they're studying something that might be exciting like firefighting. There are always not so exciting topics in what you're studying. And if we can change that in virtual reality, where you can be excited almost all the time and you're learning from everything that you're doing, and you understand why you're learning it, and you understand the feedback that you're getting and how you can improve, it just makes education that much better for everybody. And I think about it all the time that there are so many problems in the world today, and there have been so many problems for forever. And really the only thing that's going to solve every problem is education. And if we can educate the next generation so that there are better scientists to find the cure for cancer, so that there are better politicians, so that we don't have so much fighting throughout politics or in war and all these different things, the world's going to be a better place. And that starts with education.
I love that. Planting that seed.
Yes.
And also for folks who are already working and leading companies and leading teams, there are still opportunities for current leaders to reframe their thinking, re-educate or relearn or unlearn and learn it with a fresh pair of eyes and learn from immersive environment rather than just read this paper or watch this video. So I would build upon what you were saying. I think the learning is always accessible across the age groups and wherever they are in the school area or it's always ways for us to learn.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah. Most of the people that we work with now are actually fire departments. So firefighters that are between the ages of, sometimes we have training firefighters that are as low as 16 years old. They're not actually fighting fires, but as low as that age, all the way up to chiefs and people that have been in firefighting into their like 70s. And this is technology that we're building to be accessible so that whether you're 16 or you're 76, you can jump into virtual reality and start learning. And you're right, there's always new things to learn. And using firefighting as an example, you might have fought 1,000 fires, but now there's electric vehicles and there are wildfires that are larger than anything people have ever seen because of climate change. And you can now face those things in virtual reality and learn how to fight those types of fires and learn those skills that are needed for these new types of fires, so that even if you've been in the world for 50 plus years as a 76-year-old, you're still able to learn new things and you're picking up this accessible technology.
I love that. Reactivate our neuroplasticity. Love it.
Love it.
Thank you, Evan, so much for sharing your perspective, your stories, and your vision into the future with us today. And it has been a blast and a blissful moment shared with you. And for folks who are interested and want to learn more, all the Evan's contact information and links are attached below in the show notes. We encourage you to get connected and build new connections and build new possible futures, a version of futures, whichever you want to call it. So thank you so much, Evan.
Jiani, thank you for having me on. This has been amazing. I feel the magic. And yeah, for anybody that's interested in getting connected, feel free to reach out. Like Jiani said, in the show notes, there will be all the links. LinkedIn is where I'm most active. I post there at least once a day. So feel free to reach out and happy to chat.